Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. So we're going to continue our study here. And we are in Proverbs chapter 8. And if you thought it was weird before, it's going to get really weird now. As you were confused before, you ain't seen nothing yet.
And we've all been there, so I feel better. Okay,
So we're going to jump right into it in chapter 8, verse 22. Hashem kanani reshit darko, kedem mifalav me'az. The Lord created me at the beginning of his way, the first of his acts of old.
Wow.
Okay? It's not what it says. It's just, the difficulty we're running into here is the insufficiency of language, and that conceptually there are no equivalent words in English for words in Hebrew. You can't directly translate. You got to go with what the concept is in one versus the other. So you have to describe it. Now, many years ago, I was talking with David Stern, who did the Jewish New Testament, the translation. And he was describing the process that it came about. Yes, that complete Jewish Bible, that's David.
yeah.
Wonderful man, and his wife, just lovely people. And what he was saying was that he started off, he wanted to write a commentary on the New Testament from a Jewish perspective. Okay? So what he had to do first was translate the New Testament into Jewish. Because all of the Jewish had been taken out of the New Testament in all of the translations. So he started to translate from the Greek into English with an Hebraic understanding, and he very quickly got to a point where he understood that it couldn't be, because there were concepts, not direct translations of words. So if you have a word in Greek that means something in Hebrew or Aramaic, and you're going to take that into English, there is no word that encompasses the concept. It's not there, it doesn't exist. So then you have to explain the translation. So when you're explaining the translation, what do you have? You have the commentary. So they had to write the commentary first. Then he could go back and write the translation. It was a very fascinating discussion. So we're actually running into the same thing. This is important to understand, right? People ask all the time when they're coming from a Christian background, what translation do you use? And the answer inevitably is, well, all of them. Because none of them are that good.
Yeah.
They can't be. Right? So we have to understand that translations are interpretations. The translation of the Bible is somebody's interpretation of what it says. It is not the scripture. It is somebody's understanding of the scripture. Right? So if you're King James only, well, King Jimmy had an understanding, and that was it. If you're an RSV kind of person, it's a different perspective. If you like the NIV, it's a different perspective. If you like the Open Bible or the Amplified Bible, it's just a different perspective, right? And which one of these are more accurate? And the answer is none of them are accurate. They're not, they can't be, because languages are different. And the concepts that are trying to be written about in the original language do not have equivalent words in other languages. So, barring lengthy descriptions, in which case you'll never get through actually reading the text, all translations are off, all of them. One of the tricks that I tell my students you guys, is that if you look at several translations and the translations are different, significantly different, understand there's a problem, but going from the original text to some sort of concept in English, there isn't an equivalent word. It's not there. And so you're having people give their different interpretation of what it actually says. Okay? Just understand, this is a signal that if you can, go back to the original text and look. Right? So if you have several translations that are vastly different or significantly different, go back and look at the original text. It's not that the translations are bad, it's that the translations are impossible. It's all right. The translators are doing the best they can. Okay, now, we don't have that problem here because we're looking at the original Hebrew. We can take the time to discuss the concepts. And that is what we must do when we're looking here at Proverbs and the whole process of pre-creation and everything that was going on. You've got to look at the original text. It doesn't do you any good to look at translations because there's code. There's code involved. Not a code like gematria going to numbers and back. Nothing so complex. Just rather than code, I should say buzzwords. When you see certain words, certain terms in the original text in Hebrew, ding, 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 alarms go off, should go off, telling you that the type of language that is being used is in a separate category from other kinds of language that are used throughout the text. You've got language that's poetic, so you see stuff. There's warning bells should go off, like if there's acronym. If you've got a paragraph and the first sentence begins with an aleph and the second sentence begins with a bet and the third sentence begins with a gimel, guess what? We're in poetic language mode. Right? So we read it like poetry, we read it like song. We don't read it like we're reading an engineering manual, right? The language is the same, but the language is completely different. The usage is different. What it's trying to impart to us is very different. So this happens in Hebrew text all through the Tanakh. And it actually happens in the New Testament, in the Aramaic as well. So you look at the text and you determine what kind of language you're talking about. Now you go for it, right? If you're looking at poetic language, it does no good to take it literally, right? It doesn't, you don't get the concepts. You're reading, my love is like a red, red rose. And if you say, oh my gosh, yeah, she turned into a plant. Right? That's not what's going on here. And it's obvious. So the concept that's being imparted has to do with the type of language that we're talking about, in addition to the language itself. All right? There are parts of Tanakh that should be taken literally. There are parts of Tanakh which have to be taken poetically. Right? And now we're into parts of Tanakh that are taken in a different way entirely. And there are buzzwords or code words that signal to us that we should be looking at it in this way. And they've been coming up, but now we're going to begin to see them starting in verse 22, flashing the warning signs at us. The first one is, second word in, Kanani. Now, if we look at Genesis chapter 1, Genesis chapter 1 begins, Breshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz. And we translate that into English. In the beginning, right, Elohim created the heavens and the earth. Okay? But it turns out in Hebrew, there isn't a word that means created. There are, in fact, 3 words, which could all mean created, and they all mean something different. But there's only one word in English that can be translated to. So we use the word created. But in Hebrew, We're looking at something completely different depending on which word is used. So we can use nuanced words in English in the translations, and we'll get completely confused, or some people will. Or you can just say created. Different translators do it different ways. Okay? So, Breshit bara, created. In the beginning, created. And this word bara means that something was created from absolute nothing. Right? Scholars call it fiat creation. Not because creation was built as well as a fiat, but by meaning rather that there was nothing and then there was something. That kind of creation. That's what bara means. Now there's another kind of created, which is a different word completely. It's yatsar. Yatsar means something that has already been created is formed into something else. So it's not created from nothing. It's sort of, it's created, but it's kind of formed. And then there's yet another word that can be translated created, and that's asa, and that's made. Okay? But that's not really what it means. What it means is something that has been yatsard, it's been formed from stuff that's already been created, is made into something, a final act, if you will, of creation. So you've got really three levels of creation that are all translated created. So you don't know which kind of creation it is unless you go back to the original language, unless you go back to the original text. You follow? So you got bara, yatsar, and asa. You could take it into elementary physics and say that God created atoms. Okay? And then God formed yatsar, that was bara. Then yatsar is that he took the atoms and he made molecules. Okay? And then he stuck molecules together and he made stuff. Okay? And it's three different things because you can't have molecules, you can't form molecules until you've actually made atoms from nothing.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay? And you can't make molecules from nothing, you gotta have atoms.
Right.
Okay? So there's three different steps or levels or something, and they're all translated the same way into English. Seems fairly simple, right? Genesis, it says, bara, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth out of nothing. That kind of creation, right? Then the next acts were Yetzar. The sun, the moon, the stars. This is Yetzar. These weren't created out of nothing. These were created out of the stuff that God had made already. So these were formed. Okay, and then man. Man was asa. He was made out of the formed stuff that he formed out of the stuff that was created out of nothing. And it gets confusing because it talks about the creation of man, male and female, he created them. And the word created there is asa. Right? So it's not that it was out of nothingness. This was another stage of creation. Okay? So here we come to verse 22 in Proverbs. It says, the Lord created me at the beginning of his way. So which form of created do you think this is? Trick question. It's none of them.
It's not created.
It's not created. In fact, the word doesn't mean created at all. The root of this word is kana, which actually means purchased, acquired. Now, Hebrew, like English, can have one word mean several different things. You know, the word right can mean correct, or it can mean a direction. And the only way you know which meaning it is by the context. right? Rabbi Bernstein is always right. That doesn't mean that I can't make a left turn. Okay, so it's by context.
Right.
All right, so we look here also at context. So this word purchased or acquired doesn't really make sense. That's why people translate it created. But the flavor of the word is more toward purchased or acquired. And we're going to get hints about what this really means as we read through the text. The text is going to explain to us. The Lord kana, purchased, acquired me at the beginning of his way, Reshit Darko. Kedem mif'alav me'az, the first of his acts of old. Ancient acts. Genesis 1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Right? Was that the beginning? Well, what does this verse say? The first of his acts of old was in acquiring or purchasing wisdom. This was the first of his acts of old. This is before God created the heavens and the earth. Right? So how were the heavens and the earth at the beginning? Very simple. It's the difference between the words kana and bara. The first thing God barad, created out of nothing, was the heavens and the earth. This had existence prior to that. It was acquired by God before that. Told you it'd be confused. Me'olam nisachti merosh mikadme aretz. I was set up from eternity, from everlasting, from the beginning, before the earth. So it doesn't talk about being created. Bara doesn't talk about being formed. Yatzar, it doesn't talk about being made. Asa, this is before that, before the earth, which means before the heavens and the earth. Genesis 1, the heavens and the earth were made first. And they're the first things that were bara. So we're not talking about that. We're talking about things that are kana, that are acquired. Sort of. Doesn't really mean acquired. Verse 24. Be'en tahomot chalalti. When there were no depths, tahom, I was brought forth. When there were no depths, I was. Try that. Yeah. When there are no fountains abounding with water. B'teret harim. Before the mountains were settled, before the hills, I was brought forth again. I was. While as yet he had not made the earth, nor the fields, nor the highest part of the dust, afrot, of the world. When he established the heavens, I was there. When he drew a circle on the face of the deep. When he established the clouds above, when he strengthened the fountains of the deep. Okay. Wisdom was there. Wisdom was there. Okay?
That makes sense.
So what we're talking about is wisdom being created before creation was created. Here's the problem. The timeline begins with the creation of the heavens and the earth. That's when time begins. So these things exist when there's no time. When did God create wisdom? And the answer is the question makes no sense.
There's no time.
There's no before.
Okay? There's no creation from nothing. Wisdom is. right? Halalti, I was brought forth, has more the concept of the universe is made aware of it, rather than it was created. Okay? And it's before time. So there's no when. Was there ever a time that wisdom didn't exist? No. It wasn't there was God and then there was wisdom. The and then doesn't happen without time. Okay? Were the heavens created before wisdom? No. So when he established the heavens, I was there. When he gave to the sea his decree that the water should not pass his commandment, when he appointed the foundations of the earth, then I was beside him. Like a little child, I was daily his delight, rejoicing always before him, rejoicing in his inhabited world, and my delights were with the sons of men. So he's standing with God, side by side with God, from the beginning, and he liked the people. It's a good thing. Standing side by side. Okay. So is wisdom God? No. Is wisdom an angel? No. What is it? Hard to say. Okay. So we have different descriptors. Okay. We say that wisdom is an attribute of God, but that doesn't really make sense because an attribute is actually part of, you don't have an attribute standing next to, right? So again, this is a perhaps useful turn of phrase, but isn't completely accurate at all, okay? We've got several phrases that are used and you'll come across them. But the one that lacks description that is probably used most accurately is the sphera. This is a sphera. And what does it mean? Something that is, I don't know how to describe it, beyond time and space, that God uses. That happens to like people. Now, listen to me, kindlech, children. For happy are they who keep my ways. Guard, protect my ways. Okay, so there's characteristics of this sphera, right? And if we keep with the ways of wisdom, we're happy. Yay. Now, look who's writing this down. It's Solomon. He's known as being the wisest among us. He's known as being one who walks in the ways of wisdom. And now he's writing about the source, if you will, of this aspect of him and of God. An aspect of God that existed before creation. That's why I call it the pre-creation. Verse 35. Because whoever finds me finds life and shall obtain favor from the Lord. Ratzon, right? Favor, but also will. You'll be in God's will. And he who sins against me does violence to his soul. Very important word there. Hamas. Or chomes there. All those who hate me love death. Right? All those who hate wisdom love death. There's no in between. So we have to, at this point, stop and think about how we think about wisdom. Okay? Normally we think about wisdom as something that we gain, we acquire through experience. Once I put my finger in the electrical socket. I gained wisdom. I have not done it since. But we're looking at wisdom from a different kind of perspective here. Wisdom, this ability to be better experientially, is an aspect, a sphera of God. This is not something that just is. This is something that God created. And he created this before he created. Right? This was part of everything before God created anything. So you could say it existed before. Wisdom is separate from God. That's what we're reading.
Yeah, but I mean, God
So
is
if
always
wisdom
wise.
is separate from God, then you can have God without wisdom. God is always wise. That diminishes God to even think like that. Oh, it puts God in a box. God is so far beyond any of that. God is the Ein Sof. He is the immeasurable without end. So to say that everything he does is wisdom really puts him in the box. It makes him, we're trying to squeeze him into something we can understand. God's way, way above that. What is wise to us is not necessarily,
Right,
yeah.
yes.
Well, what is wise to us is not necessarily wisdom. You're right.
Yeah.
The wisdom that we're talking about is something different.
Yeah.
Okay? Study. Thousands of years of study. Right? And people thinking about it and writing about it. And this is why we look at the literature of people that have been thinking about this for thousands of years. That's how you get to understand it. Otherwise, what you do is you read it and you ignore it. Right? If you have to come up with, within yourself, every concept, you're going to fail miserably. Right? It's why we teach mathematics not from osmosis, but you start in first grade learning to add and subtract, and then you learn to multiply and divide in the next grade, and then right, and you work your way up to algebra, and then you work your way up to geometry, and then trigonometry, and the calculus, and then differential equations and linear algebra, and you keep going. Right? And it builds on itself. So you don't put an expectation on yourself that I'm going to read that and I'm going to understand it. Well, it's in the Bible, so if I read it, whatever I think about it, that's got to be it. And it's not true. That's why we have thousands of years of people vetting, because God come out with an opinion. Well, this is what I think it is. And guess what? If you're Jewish, you never let it alone. The next guy says, I disagree, and here's why. The next guy says, you're both wrong. And here's why. We even have a phrase for the davar acher. Here's another idea. This is what I think it is. Davar acher, and there's another one. Okay? And the first guy says, no, it can't be that. And here's why. So when you do this for thousands of years, you whittle down what it can't be. And so what you're left with is something that it is, as best we can understand it. And it's also subject to being understood better. So we work on it. That the wisdom was not created from nothing, right? So it was always there with God as something that God desired. That this is not God. This is not God, but it's God's desire.
But it's not another God either.
It's not another God.
No, it's not another God.
Does it?
But it's
Well,
still
then how
separate.
could it be beside God?
Still separate beside him.
I mean, that's what the text says. Verse 30. Well, read verse 30. Then I was by him like a little child. I was daily his delight, rejoicing always before him. Right? How can wisdom be separate from God?
As a confidence.
Well, wisdom can be separate from God because Solomon is explaining that wisdom is separate from God. Let me do it this way. You have will or desire, right? Okay. Is that separate from you? Okay. Is your desire you? Or are you separate from your desire? Okay, you see what we're talking about? It's not so simple. Okay? But there's definitely characteristics of your desire that are different than you. I can talk about your desire without talking about you.
Let me ask
You have a purse. Now, this doesn't say anything about your desire. Okay? Same thing. Wisdom. Is this an aspect of God, an attribute? That's why we have this word sirah, because none of those terms are sufficient to explain what we're talking about. So we throw a term out there knowing that it's insufficient. Okay? Wisdom was the first thing before all of creation. And it was with God. Now, you were leaping and missing a lot of steps that we're going to have to go back and look at because they give us a lot of explanation and change how we're going to view it. But what you saw was descriptors of Yeshua, the eternal Yeshua, the eternal Messiah. There are similar descriptors, right? He was God, he was with God, and he was God. Okay, what does that mean? Well, we get a clue from studying this. Okay, and without studying this, when you read the first chapter of the Gospel of John, you're clueless. You have no idea what that means. Right? But John, who wrote it, studied this stuff. He knew this stuff. Right? And it's part of why he wrote what he wrote, how he wrote it. Okay? So it makes you think, no, it doesn't make you think about Yeshua. It makes you think about is the language is the same. This is what I was talking about when I was talking about the code or the type of language. This is this type of language. It's used in the Gospel of John. It's used here in Proverbs. You'll see this type of language in Genesis. You'll see this type of language in Isaiah and Ezekiel, not the whole book, but just sections. And you'll know when you see this type of language that this is the way you should be thinking about it. That is a study of what we call Maaseh Bereshit, the workings of creation. That's this language where it's a bit confusing, okay? But not just any confusing. It's confusing about creation specifically. That's Maaseh Bereshit. And it's one of the reasons we study Maaseh Bereshit is because these packets of language show up in the Tanakh. And they're all over the place. And there are ties to them. And you cannot study them out of context. You have to study them in relation to each other, knowing that this language indicates this is the group that I put these particular texts in, and I look at them in relation to each other as opposed to just isolated out there, right? That I don't look at Proverbs 8 as being like a psalm. I don't look at it like as part of Ecclesiastes. It's written very, very differently. And these kinds of terminology are used. And the reason Solomon uses this kind of terminology is to tie it in with these other things as far as the Tanakh and then the Brit Chadashah is concerned. That's the tie-in.
You know, I guess the amazing thing to me is, did Solomon specifically pray for wisdom? Was that his
Yes, for wisdom, yeah.
Yeah.
his
Yes.
request?
I think they all did.
Made it a-
Well, right, Solomon, This knowledge has to, or this wisdom had to be given to mankind.
Yeah.
Okay? It happened through Solomon. Okay? If Solomon isn't there for it, it would have come through somebody else later. Right? The concept is the same as hastening the day of Hashem.
Yeah.
Right, where we can hasten the return of Messiah by doing what we're supposed to do. And if we don't, he'll tarry. It'll delay it. Just like Solomon's there, great. He's willing, wants to do it. He's seeking it, and so God lets him have it. And this is why when he wrote Song of Songs, right? Again, if you look at it through the eyes of this type of language, what you get is actually a guide to understanding Torah. And otherwise, you just look at it as a love poem. But it's much, much more than that. Way, way deeper than that. And again, this is Solomon. And Solomon could write with two usages, right? Just like John could. You read the first chapter of the Gospel of John in Greek, it's perfectly understandable. When you read it in Aramaic, it's perfectly understandable. But the two understandings aren't even close to each other. Right? The Aramaic, thinking one thing, memra and all kinds of stuff, and the Greek is logos and all of that kind of stuff. And they can grasp it and they can say, oh yeah, I get it. But they can't talk to each other about it because their understandings are completely different. And John knew he was doing that when he wrote it down. Again, very, very smart guy. Part of the reason that he had so much wisdom is that he studied a lot of Solomon. You are not getting the true meaning when you're reading the book of John in English. Why do you think there's,
That's why it's.
Rita, why do you think there's dozens of different translations? They're trying to do it as accurately as they can. Why is the King James Version different than the Revised Standard Version, different than the NIV, different than the North American Bible? Why are these all and they're all trying to be as accurate as they can, and they're all different. From a Jewish perspective, there's very little difference. I understand from a Christian perspective, there's a huge difference between Catholicism and Lutheranism or Episcopalian,
Yes.
right? I mean, this is what the whole Reformation is all about.
Yes.
And the
But the Reformation really wasn't about that theological differences at all. Reformation was about corruption,
Yeah.
right? We got to get away from corruption in the
Right.
church, and we should always get away from corruption in the church and synagogue.
Yes.
Rabbis are not exempt. We got corruption too. We got to watch out for that also. Okay, but
That was
this,
indulgences and stuff that they were.
but there's, from a Judaic point of view, there's still Greco-Roman mythology that's woven into it. There's still multiple gods that are woven into it. There's still all kinds of stuff that you just go, it's kind of all the same. In other words, if you sin, and because of the Messiah, you're going to be forgiven. But how do you make restitution for the sin?
go to him on your knees with the.
Okay, and so he forgives you. Now, how do you make restitution for the sin? See, no, that's forgiveness. That's not restitution.
Right.
Okay, I sin against Tom, right? I steal $5,000 from Tom. And I wouldn't steal $5,000 from you. I would make you feel guilty enough you just gave it to me. That's different. I go to Tom and I ask forgiveness, and he forgives me. I go to God and I ask God to forgive me through Messiah. Messiah forgives me. I still have to make restitution. I got to give him the $5,000 back. Okay, so when sin, how do you make restitution for the sin? See, this is what I'm saying, is that in Catholicism, they have worked out, right, wrong, or indifferent, I'm not judging that. What I'm saying is they have worked out a way to make restitution, and that's purgatory. Okay, now, in Protestantism, if you don't have purgatory, now I don't know whether High Church in Protestantism has purgatory or not.
I don't know.
I don't know either, okay. So,
I don't think
I don't know
so.
about these.
in the chat, if you know, throw something in there. Maybe I'll look at it later. At any rate.
Once saved, always saved.
Well, yeah, but that's forgiveness. That's not
Forgiveness,
restitution.
restitution, yes.
Every single sin. There's 613 commandments.
That's a different search.
Let me ask you. Okay. So it just came from a man's mind, and so do I think it's evil or not evil? All of Christianity is like that. Because whatever you're seeing in the Bible, some guy, gal, interpreted it the way they wanted to interpret it, and that became the rule in Christianity. It's the same thing. Again, from a Jewish perspective. There's no difference. Do I agree with purgatory? I think it's an interesting fantasy. It's certainly intellectually a very good solution, right? A very, very good solution to a problem, and that is, how do you make restitution to God for sin, right? But is there a reality to it? No. But that's neither here nor there. So do I think it's evil? If I were to judge evil that way, there would be nothing that involved with human beings that I could judge to be good. Nothing. Okay? Take anything in the Bible you want to and tell me how it's good. The problem is that any judgment like that you make is going to involve you interpreting for yourself what's in the Bible. And are we supposed to do that? Are we supposed to follow after our own eyes and own heart? Okay. Then how do we not follow after our own eyes and own hearts? With regard to Scripture, whatever you think it is that God is showing you, so you're following after your own eyes. See, the answer is, you ready? We do it together as a nation. That's the answer. So it's not read and pray and God will reveal to you. No. Let's look at what the nation does. We have read, we have prayed for thousands of years. We've argued, we've discussed, we've looked, we've said, okay, as a nation, this is our understanding. So if you don't follow after your own eyes and own heart, that you follow after Israel and the God of Israel, that's how you do it. So the difference between one guy's idea, which is purgatory, and another guy's idea, which is not purgatory, what difference does it make? Both of them are following after their own eyes. All I'm saying is, from a Jewish perspective, that's why we don't see a lot of difference. Yes. So I want to go ahead and end this. We can keep talking. We will come back. We will start in chapter 9 next week. Proverbs chapter 9. Shabbat shalom, everybody.
Shabbat shalom.
Fun stuff.